Obviously, for any economic reform, for any economic activity for that matter, stability is absolutely key. And not stepping in His Highness's toes, but Saudi Arabia has really focused on de-escalating in the region with real actions over the last few years, and that paid off and will continue to do so. It is very critical that we bring more stability into the region, and it is very critical that we play a role model in our reform to actually encourage other countries in the region to focus on their economy and what matters for their people rather than hostilities and conflicts.
And Your Excellency, from your vantage point as well, what do you see as perhaps the biggest obstacle that hinders international forums from translating high-level visions into tangible outcomes? What's the disconnect?
Well, this is actually a question with a mine, Dan. I think actually international forums, multilateral institutions actually are effective. And despite this possibly perception of otherwise, I really believe the contrary. They operate in a very complex situations where they need to align, bring and build consensus among multiple nations, sometimes hundreds, 192 now, for example, in the IMF. And to build consensus among 192 is a very complex process. So you need to negotiate, you need to make sure that people settle within their own a system of governance, and then try and be pragmatic in reaching solutions. But we have seen a lot of success. We should not really estimate the success that international organizations, multilateral institutions, international forums have delivered throughout the history of their existence. I mean, the IMF, for example, has been in existence for 80 years. Only, just to name few, in the last few years, they deployed $650 billion to support members of the IMF during a very difficult shocks in the world. And most of these are low-income countries who needed the support to be able actually to serve their nations. And I can go on and give a lot of examples. During COVID, the international forums came together, G20, the IMF, the World Bank, and came up with the debt service suspension initiative and then the common framework. That helped low-income countries deal with a shock that was very difficult and enabled them actually to support their people during the pandemic. And they could go on. And there were successes. Yes, there are delays, but these delays are not necessarily attributed to the forums or the institutions themselves. There are also individual nations that they need to go through their political process to reach agreements.